Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong and HCL Volt MX. My name is Cody J. Brown, and I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. So we're going to have an exciting talk ahead, but before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping notes. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of this discussion or you just like to share it with a friend, an email will be sent to you shortly after the webinar concludes with a link to access the on-demand session. So if you look on the right side of your screen, you'll notice a Q&A tab and a chat tab. The Q&A tab, that's where we want you to send in any questions you have for Jermel today. And if you have anything that you'd like to include just to further our conversation, I'd direct that to the chat tab. Finally, at the conclusion of today's webinar, we will have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So stick around to see if you're one of our 4 lucky winners. But on to our topic today. We are going to discuss ideation to MVP faster, a low-code approach. And I'm joined today by Jermel Ladd, Application Development Director at HCL Volt MX. And Jermel, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to you to give you as much time as you need. So I really appreciate you being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Cody, for that. And you can hear me loud and clear, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. Just, you never know once these things go live. So anyways, guys, hey, welcome to the webinar. As Cody just said, HCL Volt MX, ideation to MVP faster, a low-code approach. It's funny, when we were coming up with potential webinars, I made a list of about 4 or 5, and I really wanted them to pick this one, and they did. And the reason why I wanted them to pick this one is because this is the one I'm probably going to be the most passionate about, just because of my history and experience with doing this. But before we actually get into the webinar, what I want to do first is go into 2 words, which is the definition of ideation to MVP. So if you're new to this and you never maybe have done this before, maybe some of these words might be, okay, like what exactly, of course we all know what like an ideation is or an idea, but how are we, what do we mean by that right now? And ideation, pretty much we define it as the concept, right? The concept of your application, the concept of your idea. And then MVP is minimal viable product. It doesn't stand for, I'm a sports guy. When I first heard of MVP, I'm like, why is everyone saying MVP, like most valuable player, right? No, we actually mean minimal viable product. And what that means is it's going to be the minimal standard for the first iteration of your application. And we'll go ahead, once we start talking about the discovery process, we'll go and say, hey, like what is the MVP? Because, typically when you think of an app, you're going to think, oh, the MVP is the whole thing, right? It's the whole application. But in some cases, in most cases, it's not. So anyways, let's get right into it. So the agenda and introduction, we're going to start a little bit with my experience with LowCode, then getting into getting started with your idea, followed by discovery of your idea, which is, if you're going to stick around for this, that's probably going to be one of the most important parts. And then best practices, and then the final leg, implementing your MVP. So this is a LowCode where it's brought to you by, right, HCL Volt MX LowCode platform. So before we get started, also, I want to say why is LowCode even here in the first place, right? How did it come about? If some analysts, they say there's about 200 low-code or no-code platforms that they track. That's the ones that they are tracking. And that's not considering the ones that are in come-up mode, right? The ones that are in startup mode. In my personal opinion, and this is not like a crazy, thought, is LowCode is here simply because there aren't enough developers. There's too many people out there with ideas or concepts of applications that need to be built, yet there aren't enough developers. And I think the industry that gets hit the hardest is probably going to be the public sector. So if you're here today and you're, in the public sector, I'm sorry about that, because oftentimes low-code or developers, they follow the money, which is in the private sector. Although the public sector apps are probably the apps that get used the most and are probably actually the funnest to build, but it's a funding thing. So anyways, if we had enough developers, I don't think these low-code platforms, if we had just so many developers, I think people would go about, right, building applications just by coding it. Because why not? You have, 5 developers on the sideline, and you say, hey, we need an application. Let them code it, because coding does give you the most flexibility, right? It's going to give you the most flexibility to build an application. However, you'll see, and we'll talk about later today, there are some drawbacks, and time is probably the biggest one. So anyways, let's go ahead and get into it. So I think we need to start here with, and that's my history of application development in low code. And, you know, I'm going to take it back just to my early 20s. A long time ago, I decided to learn how to code. And hindsight, it was probably one of the best career decisions I've ever made. You know, I'm 31 right now. So I still got a little early on in my career, but it's looking like it was one of the best, you know, decisions I made. And the reason why I decided, because, you know, back in the early 20s, you know, all the time in the world, I was doing some freelance work, and I wanted to build an app. It was an app called Lift Tracker. Lift Tracker was something, you know, I was a big working out. Like, I used to work out all the time. So, and I always wanted to own my own business, right? So I was like, hey, I'm going to build an application. This is in, you know, Facebook's coming up. All these social media apps are coming up. So I was like, hey, let me do it. So I take, at the time, $3,500, which is my life savings, and I give it to my uncle to build an application. And as I'm starting to explain to him, you know, the things, the requirements of that application, I start to realize, like, hey, like, there's a problem here. Like, and it's because I can't communicate to him properly of the requirements of the application. So I decided, hey, what I'm going to do is I'm going to learn basic HTML, CSS, right? I didn't know anything about programming. I just say, hey, this is a website, so let me learn some HTML, CSS. And I fell in love with it, right? I did, oh, this is cool. Like, let me throw some JavaScript in here now, right? Let me do some PHP, okay? Let me do some MySQL. I really just loved it, right? And you know, that's not going to happen to everyone, because I've seen people go down that route and they just don't fall in love with it. But for me, I did. Now, fast forward a little bit, that app ended up, Lift Tracker, not working out. And it's for several reasons that I won't get into right now, but it allowed me to learn and grow. And then I would try, Lift Tracker wasn't the only one. I would do this about 3 or 4 more times, but this time I wouldn't need my uncle anymore. I would try to program it myself. And each time I failed, I got a little bit better. I got a little bit better, and a better understanding on both how to develop it and also how to just plan for it. The first time when I, you know, was doing the first app after Lift Tracker was an app called Mile High. I was all over the place still. But then once I got to my last app, which is an app called JBot, I'm not here to promote any of those apps. It was, I was pretty good by then. But anyways, fast forward again to, I get a, you know, call from my friend saying, hey, you want to come work for, you know, supply chain analytics. I'm in the tech industry now, right? Doing sales as an SDR. And this is when I first heard about low code. It was a colleague of mine. She was going to a low code company. And I remember when she first told me, I was like, okay, you're going where? You know, given my experience as an application developer, I'm like, you're going where? Good luck with that. And I didn't really try to hold her back, because that colleague, specific colleague, you know, me and her kind of, you know, grinded gears a little bit. So I was like, okay, you know, see you later. And I think I would be humbled within 2 months, because I actually joined her company because I began to look at it. And I said, like, this is interesting. Like, this could work. And 6 months into it, after being there, I realized I was right. The low code is not possible. It's too complex. And it, you know, looking back on it now, that first company I was at just was doing it a little bit wrong. But then I would go to my next company, which was more of a no code company. And this company would focus more on the citizen developers, right? People who don't know how to program. Let's just go ahead and let's give them a platform to use. Now, this was interesting. I saw a lot of applications being built at this time, and but however, they did lack some complexity, because if you go back to the apps that I were building, I was like, hey, like, you know, I really want to see like, I was used to complex apps, so they were good. However, it was just, you know, it wasn't necessarily, you know, scratching that, or, you know, scratching that tickle. But it was fun. And I saw, once again, a lot of apps being developed at that time. Then after about 3 or 4 years of being there, I stumbled upon HCL, and I saw the VoltMX platform, and I said, wow, now this is interesting. I said that again, because I had never seen a platform, right, that can handle the type of like sophistication that the apps that were built on it. And one of my biggest accomplishments as a developer was building a completely offline application. I coded this thing. And if anyone here who's ever coded an app before, you would know that that is it's not an easy, or excuse me, coding an offline app before, you would know that that is not an easy task to do. So HCL Voltim-X was, a couple lines of code. And I was like, dang, like that is a really cool platform. So I share that history with you from Lyft Tracker to my first couple companies, right? Not to, talk, kind of brag on that in my history, but, I wanted to share that with you because I've seen the application development process. I've seen, things go from ideation to MVP. And I've been in several different seats, from the person that was thinking of the idea to also on the other side of the person helping implement that idea. And if you're gonna go forward and kind of take some of this advice, I thought it was important for you guys to know that. That way, once you listen to what I'm saying, you know where that experience or where that wisdom is coming from. I'm not saying that it's wise, but I couldn't think of a better word. So, anyways, let's get started with a hypothetical scenario. And we're going to look at a field inspection app as we go through this process. I think it's good to have some context, right? Once we start getting into the actual discovery session and how you get to MVP, it's going to be good for us to have a hypothetical scenario. That way we can put some context behind it. But anyways, Bobby is, and this is the only slide I'm going to read from, guys. Bobby is a project manager for a contract company who serves the local utility company. Okay. He's constantly behind on submitting completed projects because he's not receiving the inspection paperwork from his field service agents. Man, okay, Bobby. This paperwork is required in order to submit and receive payment from the local utility company. This is a true use case, right? I kind of try to make it a little bit more simple, but this happens. And this is the hypothetical scenario that we're going to roll with. So, getting started. Now, first, thank yourself. If you are actually going to go down this route, thank yourself for getting here, because I'm sure that this app, this idea is something that's been on your heart for a while, right? None of us really run into a problem right away on the first time and like, man, I'm going to build an app right now to solve this issue because I never want to go against it. I never want to be, conquered by it ever again. No, this is something that usually, for me at least, whenever an idea would come, right, it'd be something that kind of starts, within your heart, right, within your chest. You can kind of, you can't recognize it at first, but you can feel it that it's there. And all of a sudden, you start to be able to, grasp it, and you start thinking about it, an idea, and you're like, man, like, you wake up sometimes in the morning right before you go to work, and you're like, okay, like I got to do this. And then once you start coming across the problem that the app would eventually solve, it just starts to, grind your gears. You feel it and you get frustrated and you say, enough is enough. I'm going to, go and do something about this. So I want to thank you for getting here, because I know that feeling all too well of having almost been just consumed by an idea. So let's get started on how we might go about accomplishing or building out that concept so we can get to MVP. And remember, it's in bold at the bottom. The ability to build it fast and prove value is going to be crucial. The ability to build the application fast and prove value is going to be crucial in the success of the project. So before you even, suggest a serious attempt within your organization to actually go and build a solution, I would encourage you to do these things on paper or however you like to get your ideas out. For me, I always open just a doc, right? A Word document, Google Doc, and I just start typing. And I start typing about what the idea is and some of these things here. So I start usually with the why. Identify the problem you want to solve and the value it will bring. That is, the value's in green, right? Because it's important to understand the value right away. If there is no value of the application you're trying to build, it's not going to, unless you have time, like how I had time in my early 20s, it's not really going to work. No one's going to buy into it. So remember that, remember the value, then start listing out the who's, like, who is this going to impact? Because likely this app, just like with Bobby, it's not going to impact yourself only. It's going to impact several lines of business. So start writing out the who and then the when. Obviously, you're probably going to say, listen, now, man, this has been in my heart. I can't go on like this, but be realistic about it. When can you actually build this thing? Is there a budget calendar that you have to look at? Some Larger enterprises, they can only spend money. They plan budgets at the beginning of the year, and that's it, right? So you got to be in line with that. And also, is there a next big project, like in Bobby's example, right? He was doing jobs for field, for utility companies. Is there a big project coming up that would be a good project to, implement this on? So let's move on. Now, the build your idea and business case. Now this is the what. So once you start listing out all those things, now it's okay, how am I going to solve this, right? You listed out the problem. Now this is the what or the how. And, you don't start jotting down some ideas, some potential screens, right? You don't need to get this right now. It's probably what you jot down now. It's going to be completely changed, right? By the time you actually start shopping this around. But start to, say, hey, this is how I think it should work. And remember, think about the key KPIs for this app and the measure of success. So what is going to be the measurement of defining how the app is successful? And then once you have that, right, then go out and start, seeking people, seeking your colleagues, seeking the people in the who's, right, who would be impacted by this. Set up one-on-one meetings. I wouldn't suggest just bringing it up in a group right away. I would suggest set up a one-on-one meeting, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, and start building support, right? Get people fired up. You are in a leadership role now, right? This is a time for, there's a line from a movie, one of my favorite movies. It goes, you're the colonel, you're going to command your troops. It's a football movie. I'm a football guy. And it's so true, right? When you're coming with this idea, you're in this leadership role now. Okay, so it's time to start building that support, and then you can start, planning the bigger meetings. But once you start talking to people, the hows are going to change. The what and how the app is going to function, it's going to change. Before proceeding, though, there's a checkpoint here, and it's funny because when we were originally coming up with the content for this webinar, there was a lot of slides or a lot of talking points on budget and process. And it was determined hey, we can actually do a whole entire webinar just on this part. And it's really, hey, if you're in a larger company or organization with a lot of processes, start to seek out how how do you get budget? Find people within your organization who have bought software before. Seek those people out, get their guidance, right? Get their counsel, because it would be unfortunate to do everything that we're about to talk to and then realize that, hey, this organization, I just can't do it. I can't get budget. So really seek people out on this. This part is important. Getting back to it now. Now it's time to identify, right, the resources, who's going to build it, and how the solution, how are they going to build it? So there's two sides to this, right? The who and the how. So the who usually, maybe it's going to be an IT team, right? At some organizations, there are innovation teams specifically they're responsible, especially if you're at a large company, you may not even know that some of these teams exist, but they are saying, hey, we're the rapid development team, right? They're going to be those front leaders when it comes to building mission critical apps and getting it done quickly. Some of you may be saying, hey, I am the team, right? There's no team but me. And that's perfectly okay too, but start trying to figure out who's going to be the team to build it. Then on the other side is the solution. How are they going to build it? And this is it going to be like a vendor? Are you guys going to use a low-code platform? Are you going to do like a hybrid approach where there's some coding, some platform, some off-the-shelf solution? Start trying to figure out the solution of what is going to be used. So before we go any further, I want to talk to you about low-code platforms. And this slide specifically, guys, isn't here to promote VoltMX at all, but to promote low-code. And as we go through this, you'll see the value of what a low-code vendor can bring from two sides, not only just from the speed, but also from the experience. Because if you end up moving forward with a low-code platform, or maybe you already have one, you have the expertise of the vendor. The vendor is going to, this may be your first project, this may be your fifth project, but this is going to be the vendor's 500th project, the 1,000th project. So they have that experience, and they're going to be able to help guide you through this next part, which is going to be the discovery part. But still, and also one last thing on the vendor when it comes to low code, they're going to be able to use the platform, right? But also they often, all these vendors, they have services arms to it. So let's just say you're back to the person, I am the team, but hey, I got some money. The vendor can build it for you as well. So not only can they help you, they can use a low code platform to build the solution for you. If you've gotten this far, host a discovery session with stakeholders. Again, congratulate yourself for getting this far. Most projects, in my experience, don't even make it this far for several reasons. You know, it's not just because people are lazy and they don't want to, they don't have the time. Shouldn't say lazy, but they just don't have the time. That's not the reason. Also, budget. Maybe in the budget discovery, you said, hey, I just won't be able to get budget. Not enough ROI. Maybe that the value, the why wasn't strong enough, or maybe it's just not possible due to processes. But if you're about to move forward with this discovery session, hey, you're like, you know, when it comes, you know, you say like what 2% of companies like make it, 98% of companies fail. You're getting towards that 2% here. So the next session, and by the way, if you're going to lock in on any slide, this is probably going to be my longest slide here because there's a lot to talk about here with a discovery session. But this is probably one of the most important parts to from ideation to MVP is right now. So you're going to want to host like I said, discovery session with all the stakeholders. And when running a discovery session, there are two options from this perspective, meaning there's self-ran and then there's vendor ran. And vendor ran usually means if you're using like a third-party company, right? Like a low-code company. So before we go any further, I'm going to speak in the context as if you're moving forward with a vendor and they're going to help you out with this process. If you're doing it in-house, just make the adjustments on how you would substitute yourself for the vendor. So the first thing is to assign a leader for the discovery session. I've been in several of these sessions and there needs to be a leader from both the ideation side, right? And the vendor side. There needs to be that leader that kind of, because you guys are going to disagree on some processes, right? You're not going to agree on everything. And that leader can be that person that just takes command and takes charge and says, okay, guys, listen, I get it, but we need to move forward and this is how we're going to do it. Also, I'm going to now talk about pre-workshop, like a checklist of before you even do the workshop, which is a discovery session, which we'll get into the next slide of what a discovery session looks like, but do some pre-workshop activities. And this is also important. You need to prep, because if you just go into a discovery session, like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I kind of prepped. I'm the one who did all the whys, the hows, and you're just going to show up without prepping everyone else, it's not going to go well, right? I could really tell on the discovery sessions that I've been a part of, the people who prep and the people who don't prep. It's night and day. So schedule a meeting, maybe just a quick meeting with all the stakeholders on your side, set expectations, right? And then on the other end, send the organization or the vendor that's hosting this, that's hosting the discovery workshop, send them your raw notes, the hows, the whys, right? Send them any other assets that you may have that's appropriate or associated with this idea, right? Whether it's like paperwork. So back to Bobby's example, maybe it's the paperwork that these guys were always, lagging and not turning behind. Send that into them. The vendor, before the workshop even starts, they're going to have a meeting on how to make you successful. So if you provide them all of the assets that you can, it's going to only make this session go much smoother. And then also communicate with the vendor who's going to be in the session. I've been in these discovery workshops, right, where it's like people just show up to the meeting, and it's okay. But sometimes, like, it's just a bunch of designers, right? Okay, well, now we really need to be focused from a vendor perspective. We really need to be focused on talking about design, because they have 10 designers in here, maybe one business analyst in here. So really send that list of people who are going to be at the meeting on your side, that the discovery session on your side, send that to the vendor. And then also ask for an outline of the discovery session. So ask the vendor saying, hey, like, how's this going to work? That way you can prep your team as well. That way they know, like, because I've been in some of these sessions again where we have like 5 parts, and the first part takes like 4 hours. And we're trying politely saying, hey guys, like we really need to move on. And the customer is, they're getting stuck on part one. So if you set those expectations of what's coming within your team, it's going to help them be more successful as well in this session. And then also highlight the minimal business value that is acceptable. So tell the vendor that before the session even starts, like, hey, this is like, we need this. This is going to be the minimal value. And it allows the vendor to kind of lock in on, hey, this is what we need at the end of the day, the bigger picture. And then make sure, this is important, make sure before the session starts, this is probably the most important pre-workshop checklist item, make sure you know what assets the vendor is producing before the session starts. So meaning, there are 3 assets that I think are a must, that must come out of this discovery workshop. And one is wireframes. Wireframes are designs on what the potential solution is going to look like. 2 is going to be user stories. So oftentimes what vendors will do is they'll take a wireframe and they'll break it down into user stories, which are like bullets, right? Bullets of requirements of the application. And this is going to be important once we get to the last part. And then a process flow as well. So I already kind of talked about process flow, but a process flow essentially is, hey, the app goes from this screen to this screen to this screen, and it kind of maps it out, makes it visual. So those 3 items I would say are a must. And so make sure you know what your vendor is going to produce from a discovery workshop standpoint, and make sure you know, that way you can have that once it's done. So this is what a typical discovery session might look like. And this is why I really encourage people to use a vendor for this, even if you don't plan on using a low-code platform. Please, because these usually, some vendors will give this away for free. Some will charge money, minimal amount of money, but it's just to make sure that, hey, like you're serious about this project and you're just not wasting people's times. But they will have the structure of this. And I won't break down day 1 and day 2 and what's in there. But in my experience, you should be able to get a medium-sized app done in 2 days, right? And each day is going to be like 4 hours. The first day is always longer than the second day, but you should be able to get that initial part done in about 2 days. Let's see. Yes, I think that's enough, but kind of just look at this slide here and see some of the things of, I guess high level. Day 1 typically is, you guys define the roles, the whys behind it, and then you start doing like a process flow. Most vendors, what they'll do is they'll visualize it for you, rather it's in person or virtual. They'll visualize it for you. That way everyone can look at something and understand where they're at. But that's typically day 1. And then day 2, the vendor will be overnight, saying, hey, they'll do some wireframes, some designs, iron some things out. And then they'll come back to you to day 2 saying, hey, is this right? And then you guys start to iron out some of those final features. So tips and best practices. This is just from what I've seen that works. I've been through several of these sessions for myself, right? And understand that each day, especially that first day, it's probably going to be about 4 to 6 hours. So really plan this in the morning. This is not an afternoon thing, right? It's not an after lunch, like, oh, I'm just going to do this. This is fun too, right? So I would plan this first thing in the morning when everyone's fresh. Maybe like an hour, 10 a.m., you have a little break for lunch, but plan in the morning, 4 to 6 hours, day 1 usually. And it's best to do this in person. However, it is possible, when COVID hit and we would only do these in person. And when COVID hit, we were like, hey, like, is this going to be even possible? Back when I was, at my previous company, when COVID was around, still around today. What am I talking about? So it's okay to do it virtually, but try to do it in person if possible. And also, if it's a larger application, I think this goes without saying, break it up into multiple sessions. So if you're talking about a big application, maybe that first initial part, it's not broken up. It's not on one day. You break it up into 2 days, and then that check back is the 3rd day. But don't be afraid to break it up, because what you don't want is you don't want people at the end of the session just like, okay, man, I'm tired of this. I don't want to go any further. Like, and then they just start saying, okay, whatever. You really want people to be fresh with this, and you don't want to burn them out. So some expectations. Expect to be exhausted. I'm always exhausted. Rather, I'm the ideation person, right? Or I'm the vendor. It's an exhausting process. For me, maybe I I like doing these things, and it's still draining for me, but it's fun. It's draining in the moment, but it excites me, right? And expect on these meetings, by the way, not to agree on everything. You may have this idea, especially if you're the leader of it, and you're like, no, this needs to be it. However, not everyone's going to agree with you, and that's okay, right? There's that line from a movie I don't think I should name the actual movies here, but there's a line saying, hey, I wasn't great anymore because you guys weren't there to disagree with me. And I think that's so true. You don't want people who are always agreeing with you, because then, you don't want that. You want people who are going to challenge you, right? And then expect to be challenged and uncover things that you didn't anticipate as well. Like, oh man, like once you start going through this, you might have done all that pre-homework or pre-research on your idea, but you're going to come up with things that you didn't think of, and it may be an obstacle, but you're going to break through. You got this. And then expect to be fulfilled and excited. You are finally solving that business problem, that thing that's been in your chest. So expect that feeling like, man, after this session, you're like, yes, I finally got it. Everyone's on the same page. So expect that feeling to come. It will come. Satisfaction. And remember, have fun. This is a fun process. Most people, I remember all of the discovery sessions I've ever been a part of. And even though the majority of them weren't my idea, but it's just fun, not just because it's fun talking. I mean, who doesn't like sitting in a room, right, and just coming up with ideas? You don't want to do that every day. But also the reason why it's memorable, because the people on the other end, you can really tell, like you can see the light come out of them, right? It's almost like I used to be a wedding videographer, and it just, you can see that joy coming out of them, right? And it's similar to, what I would used to see on weddings. So those are some of my tips and best practices. So we have a couple slides left, so just stick with me, guys. Now, the discovery session is done, and there's another checkpoint here. You now have a more clear idea on the app and the solution. Now there's the question, hey, are there any other stakeholders that need to be included? Because during that process, you probably uncovered even more things and said, hey man, maybe now I need to kind of get my boss's boss involved or something like that, because I didn't know that this was going to impact them. So I would encourage, after the discovery session, not immediately after, but maybe like a day or two after it's done, especially if you're working with the vendor, have an internal meeting. Doesn't need to be long, 15 minutes. Hey guys, what did you like about that? Was that, just kind of get everyone together just to kind of do a checkpoint where everyone's head's at. And then also start to figure out, start thinking about what's going to be in the MVP. So just things to do after the discovery session is executed. Now talking about finalizing the MVP features. So before you even start to actually like hardline finalize this, make sure, I'm going to say this in a deep voice, make sure you get your assets, right? Those assets that your vendor, you guys discussed at the beginning, make sure you get those, because that is going to make this so easy. And that's why those assets, those process flows, those wireframes, those user stories are going to be important, because now, unfortunately, it's time to start defining what the MVP is. And I say unfortunately because I've seen people, once we start going through this and saying, hey, what needs to be in the MVP? Because we want to try, we go back to one of those earlier slides, we want to try to prove value right away. We can't build the whole entire application right away with all the requirements and then just release it and hope that it goes well. We need to do an MVP, which is the minimal viable product that is going to deliver us results right away. And so, example, a picture for Bobby's app, right? A picture of out in the field, that is a requirement. But the location of the image, this is just an example, the location of the image and making sure that the image was taken while on site, that may not be a requirement, right? That may not be what we include as an MVP feature, because, hey, it's not that it's a nice to have, and it doesn't mean that we're not going to do that later in a future version. The MVP is just version 1, right? There's going to be version 1.1, 2.0, 10.0, right? But we need to define, we need to set a minimal standard first, because it's going to allow you to start providing value right away for your organization, especially if you have this thing funded. You're gonna be like, man, Jason came for me for, $50,000, and man, look at him now. Like, he's already getting value out of this application 3 months later. So start to finalize those MVP requirements, and do this together as a group. I know you've already hosted multiple group meetings at this moment, so maybe you can try to do it one-on-one if people are a little bit exhausted of some of this, right? But make sure you do it together, and make sure the vendor is included with this, right? Because they're going to be able to provide that expertise for you, or not for you, but provide it to you. So make sure you seek their knowledge of best practices. And one last thing on this, remember the slides, the earlier ones, 7 and 8, where it talked about the whys behind it. Remember that when finalizing the MVP. And it's okay, once again, this tip at the bottom, to remove certain features that you thought were going to be mandatory, because you will get them. It's just talking about what's the minimal viable product. So anyways, finalize the MVP features. And finally, you've done all this work. Honestly, from my experience, if you've done the discovery session, 90% of the time, you're going to move forward, right? You're going to get here, because you'll lay out the requirements. You'll develop a plan that makes sense. The only thing that usually fails at this point is budget, right? If you can't get the budget from your organization. However, if budget's not a problem, or it's not like a huge obstacle, right? You're going to get to this part. So this is, depending on how you're building the application, right? This may be the easiest part for you. This might be the time to really go to work for the ones that are saying, I am the team. So anyways, what to expect during the MVP process, or the development process. And I personally suggest to develop in an agile methodology. And as we can see here, agile, some of you, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with this methodology, but essentially what we'll do is we'll break the development stage cycles, to MVP down into sprints. And sprints are essentially 2 week long. They can be a week, they can be a month. But it's a development period where at the beginning of each sprint, you define what are we going to do. Then the sprint development check-ins, daily check-ins or whatever of how the development's going. And at the end of the sprint, what did we get done and how can we improve for next sprint? And it's just going to be a cycle of sprints. And usually you'll be about 4 sprints and 5 sprints to get to the MVP. And a typical sprint team looks like, if we look at the bottom left, that's what a typical, this is the HCL development team structure, but this is also, it's not like we created this. And you'll have a global delivery manager, sprint leader, and then you'll have all these different positions. So if you're doing a hybrid approach with the vendor, right, and the vendor is going to help you develop some of the application, try to plug in some of your team members. Maybe you have designers on your team or business analysts. It's okay to say, hey, Mr. Vendor, Mrs. Vendor, right? I want some of my members on the team. And the vendor is going to be happy because they know that once your team has a better understanding, they're not only going to get the requirements right in the MVP, but it's just going to be better adoption of the platform. So they'll be more than happy to plug you guys in. And then finally, I would say this, I work with, several different clients, and sometimes clients say, you know what, Jamal, this is something that's been in my heart. It's been, aching, burning, but I just don't have the time. I got this going on. They start listing all these things. I'm like, yeah. And the thing that I always say to them at that moment is a lot of people, especially if you've never done this before, they don't necessarily know from a time expectation how much time is needed, right, in order to develop an MVP, especially if you're working with the vendor. And we see here in the description in the upper left, this is the expectation. Is if the vendor's doing it, it may not be as much time as you thought it would be. It may be something like a half an hour a day, right? Just a quick check-in, because they're going to be doing the work, right? So, if you're thinking, hey, I just don't have the time really, you may be blowing the amount of time it will take you out of proportion, because there's teams that can do this for you, and all you have to do is check in with them. And because you did the discovery, because you have an idea, right? of what needs to be done and what a clear idea, then the vendor can do the development and you can just meet up with them. So, and lastly, I have sit back and have fun. So the summary, let's recap of what we just talked about at a high level. 1, build your business case out on paper. Start getting other people fired up. 2, identify options for building the app. 3, host a discovery session with the stakeholders. Most fun, most important part. 4, finalize the MVP features. Go back, say, hey, this is what needs to be in the first iteration of the product. And 5, build the MVP. We didn't really talk a lot about the development process for 5, but it is an important, part, and seek the vendor for their expertise. So as you can see, let me leave you here with this thought. If you've made it this far, thank you, by the way, appreciate your time. But this process, it can be a lot to take in or a lot to do. However, that is why we encourage low-code platforms, because this, there's a lot going on here, from the discovery to firing people up. The 5th part, building the MVP, you're going to want to try to find like cheat codes, right? Like little ways to make this process be more efficient. And that's why low code in this situation, like it's a great solution, right, for accelerating this process. Because we go back to the first slide, the thing that was in big bold letters, it said the ability to provide value and provide it fast is going to be important. And low code, once you get to 5, you want that process to go fast. And also, when you're defining the MVP, I like to say with low code, some of the biggest benefits of it is not iteration number 1, iteration 1.1, 1.2, fixing that. Because frankly, even once you get to the step 5, there's going to be changes in the application. There's going to be changes in the requirements, things that you didn't even map out in the pre-discovery, discovery. Things are going to change. And that's why low code is going to be a platform, a great platform to choose, because it's going to make those changes go faster. So brings me now to HCL Volt MX, right? And that is the low code platform that I, now represent, I work for. And we support several here at HCL Volt MX, several different industries use cases. And it goes back to that experience that I shared in the beginning with doing different kinds of apps. Rather, I developed it, right? Or other people developed it. HCL Volt MX, I know I work here right now, so this statement may be a little bit biased, but it is the best low-code platform. These use cases that I've seen here, I haven't seen with any other low-code platform, and I'm keeping that real. Like, I'm not just saying that because I work here. These use cases are incredible that we have, and the logos are customers. It's impressive. It's impressive. So, but other things about Voltimax, we are an industry leader. We're on the analysts, the major analyst reports, and we've been around for about the platform Voltimax itself has been around for about 2 years now, but the roots of it have been around, back when mobile apps were first a thing. And check it out. It's a great platform, and I'm going to go here to the next slide. Get a free 30-day trial by scanning this QR code. You can use unlimited developers, build unlimited apps, pretty much have full access to the platform. I think we do restrict like 1 or 2 things, but it's a good way to get your hands on it. And then if you're like, hey, like low code is great, but I'm at the ideation part, Jamal, like I'm in the beginning. This is the time. This is the QR code scan, because you can reach out to us. We'll help you with that process. We'll be that vendor to help you move forward with this process. And you may not get me, you may get someone else, but our team is very strong. A lot of great people over here. HCL Technologies, as a company as a whole, we're like 150,000, actually 190,000 people. So reach out to us. If not us, definitely, go on this journey. It's a fun journey. It's really rewarding. So I'm at 43 minutes. I'm a little bit over. I told the team, hey, I'm going to try to get it in 35. So thank you for sticking around a little bit longer. And if you're here now, thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day. And also, if you're watching this, hopefully rewatching it on a recording, hopefully you watched at 2x speed and I wasn't talking too fast. But I'm now going to pass it back to you, Jacob, but also I'm going to look to see if there's any questions in the Q&A. Oh yeah, hello from Toronto, Brazil, New York, Atlanta. Wow. San Francisco. Sorry, I'm reading all the places. I'm gonna take one question here. Someone asked, how long does it typically take between ideation and MVP? Great question. Because we're at the top of that, time, I won't get into too much details, but I would say it's going to take you from ideation, right? From, drumming up those troops to end of a discovery workshop. That's probably going to take, you can get it done as fast as like 4 weeks. Typically, it's going to take you like 6 weeks. And then the actual development period, this is why you want a low-code platform. That's going to take you medium-sized app. Of course, this is going to be, it's going to depend on the scope of the application, but I typically see it around 6 weeks, right? So if you have an idea, you can be live with your app within as little as 3 months. And that's going through the discovery and the development of MVP. So that's all I have here. And if I didn't get to your question, we'll try to email you. But, back to you, Jacob. Thanks.
All right, I appreciate it, Jermel. So just a quick reminder to our audience today that this webinar was recorded. So if you missed any of the session or you just want to share it with a friend, you'll receive an email with a link to access the on-demand recording. Or if you give it about 24 hours, you'll find this webinar living on the DevOps website. Just visit devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. So real quick, we're going to announce the winners of our 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. Our first winner is Ty D. Our second winner is Padmini S. Our third winner is Carol P. And our fourth and final winner is Patty A. So congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. And if you don't find the email, just check your spam folder. Jermel, thank you so much for being here with us today, for putting together this presentation and walking us through a process that's, it's constantly changing, and it seems like you've provided a way that's going to make it a lot easier for a lot of people to build apps. So it's awesome information that you've come on here to give to us. So Jermel, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Jacob. Appreciate it.
Sure. I'd like to thank our sponsor, HCL Volt MX, I'd like to thank them for sponsoring today's webinar. And our final thanks goes to you, our audience, for being here with us for the entirety of today's presentation. Please take a second to fill out our post-webinar survey, and I hope to see you at a future TechStrong webinar.